Hello, everyone. She was not born into glamour, but into the shadow of the Soviet Union, in a world where fashion was whispered about, not celebrated. Tatiana Sorokko was told she was too tall, too unusual, too foreign-looking to ever belong to the Western ideal of beauty. Yet when she stepped onto the international stage, she became the first Russian model to conquer Paris and New York, opening doors for an entire generation to follow. Her story was not simply about posing for cameras. It was about crossing borders political, cultural, and personal, and redefining what it meant to be a muse. At the height of her career, Tatiana embodied both mystery and elegance, leaving behind a legacy that stretched far beyond the runway. Tatiana Sorokko was born in 1971 in Arzamas 16, a secret military town deep within the Soviet Union, later known as Sarov. It was a place shrouded in silence, where entry and exit were controlled, and where ordinary life was lived under the shadow of secrecy. Growing up in such an environment shaped Tatiana's perspective early on. She learned to observe, to carry herself with caution, and to value the smallest freedoms. Her family was educated but modest. Her father worked as a physicist, part of the scientific community that defined the closed city, while her mother was a school teacher. This background surrounded her with books, discipline, and an emphasis on intellectual achievement. Fashion, in that world, was seen as frivolous and indulgence of the West. For a young girl like Tatiana, beauty was not something encouraged, but something that quietly set her apart. From a young age, she stood out physically, tall, slender, with striking features. She was often told she looked different from the other girls in school. At first, this difference felt like isolation. She was teased for her height, for her foreign-like appearance, and she often felt like she did not belong. Yet this same uniqueness would one day make her unforgettable on the international stage. Despite the restrictions of Soviet life, Tatiana developed a fascination with aesthetics. Her mother's magazines, smuggled Western fashion editorials, and glimpses of elegance in cinema ignited her imagination. She studied not only the clothing, but the way women carried themselves, their expressions, the aura they projected. Even then, she sensed that beauty was not just about appearance, it was about presence. Tatiana's personality was shaped by contrasts. On one hand, she was reserved, shaped by the cautiousness of her environment. On the other, she possessed a quiet confidence that grew stronger with each year. While other girls dreamed of stable careers in teaching or science, Tatiana began to nurture the sense that her path would not be ordinary. Her adolescence brought further tension. The Soviet Union was changing, and with it, so were opportunities. But even in those final years of the Iron Curtain, the idea of a girl from a closed city becoming an international model seemed impossible. For Tatiana, however, impossibility was never a barrier, it was a challenge. Her childhood was not glamorous. It was disciplined, quiet, and shadowed by rules. Yet within that structure, Tatiana Sorokko developed the very qualities resilience, self-possession, and an aura of mystery that would later define her as a model. She did not grow up believing she would be a muse. She grew up learning how to carry silence with power and how to turn difference into destiny. The story of Tatiana Sorokko's entry into fashion begins in one of the most unlikely places, a closed Soviet city, where dreams of Parisian runways or New York photo shoots were almost unthinkable. Yet destiny has a way of breaking through walls, even those built by the Iron Curtain. As a teenager, Tatiana stood out in every crowd. She was already over 6 feet tall, with an elegance that seemed effortless. Friends joked that she looked like she belonged in the glossy magazines they could only glimpse from the West. But in the Soviet Union of the late 1980s, such dreams had little space. Modeling was not a profession to aspire to. It was barely even recognized as legitimate work. The turning point came with the arrival of perestroika and glasnost, policies that opened small cracks in the closed society. Western culture began to seep into the Soviet Union, and with it came new possibilities. A scout from Paris, traveling through Moscow in search of fresh faces, spotted Tatiana Her height, her striking cheekbones, and her quiet but magnetic presence made an instant impression. She was invited to consider modeling internationally, an opportunity almost unheard of at the time. Tatiana was both intrigued and terrified. Leaving the Soviet Union for a career in the West was not a simple decision. There were political hurdles, family concerns, and the daunting reality that she barely spoke English. Her parents, rooted in academia and science, were skeptical. Modeling was unstable, unproven, and fraught with risks. But Tatiana felt an undeniable pull. For a girl who had grown up behind gates, the chance to see the world was irresistible. Her first steps into modeling were tentative. She traveled to Paris, where the fashion world was undergoing its own transformation. The late 1980s were the dawn of the supermodel era, a time when names like Naomi Campbell, Linda Evangelista, and Christy Turlington dominated. Into this rarefied circle walked Tatiana Sorokko, tall, mysterious, and carrying an aura of otherness. At her first casting sessions, she felt like an outsider, surrounded by women who already embodied glamour. Tatiana was quiet, reserved, even shy. But when the camera was turned on, something remarkable happened. Her stillness became presence. Her seriousness translated into intensity. Photographers found in her a new kind of beauty, one shaped not by familiarity but by intrigue. Her very first editorial shoot was a revelation. The images captured her in stark black and white, her angular frame cutting through the softness of the composition. The photos circulated quickly among Parisian designers. Here was a model who did not smile easily, who carried herself with the mystery of a world that Western audiences had barely glimpsed. She was not just another face, she was the embodiment of a cultural shift, the first Russian muse breaking into high fashion. The industry's reaction was swift. Designers like Karl Lagerfeld and Gianfranco Ferré recognized her potential and invited her onto their runways. She walked with a gravity that felt cinematic, as though every step was deliberate, measured, and imbued with story. She was no longer the girl from Sarov. She was Tatiana Sorokko, a model who brought with her the weight of an entire era of change. Still, her journey was not without resistance. Some agents doubted whether the Western audience was ready to embrace a Russian model. Others told her she would never achieve the same visibility as her Western peers. But Tatiana carried within her the resilience of her Soviet upbringing. Each rejection was met with quiet determination. Each casting became an opportunity to prove that her difference was her strength. Within just a few years, Tatiana Sorokko transformed from a provincial girl with no access to fashion into one of the most in-demand models of the 1990s. Her entry into the industry was not a fairy tale, it was a collision of history, politics, and personal will. And in breaking through those barriers, she did more than begin a career. She carved a path for countless others who would follow from Russia and beyond. By the early 1990s, Tatiana Sorokko had established herself as one of the most recognizable faces on the international stage. She was no longer simply the Russian model. She was the model who had crossed borders and brought with her a sense of mystery that Western fashion could not ignore. Her runway career soared quickly. Tatiana walked for Chanel under Karl Lagerfeld, where her statuesque height and cool elegance embodied the modern woman he envisioned. She became a favorite of Gianfranco Ferré at Dior, who admired the regal stillness she carried on the runway. In Paris and Milan, her presence was magnetic. Her walk was not flamboyant, but deliberate. Every step measured like the movement of a dancer who understood the drama of silence. Editorials followed, solidifying her place among the decade's icons. She graced the pages of Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, and Elle, photographed by masters like Stephen Meisel, Richard Avedon, and Irving Penn. What made her stand out was her ability to embody extremes. In one shoot, she could appear austere, sculptural, almost untouchable. In the next, she radiated warmth and vulnerability. This duality fascinated editors and designers alike. In 1992, Tatiana became the first Russian model to appear on the cover of American Vogue. The cover was more than a personal triumph. It was symbolic. At a time when the world was still adjusting to the collapse of the Soviet Union, Tatiana represented a bridge between two worlds that had long been divided. She was not just a face of beauty. She was a cultural marker, proof that the East could stand alongside the West in the language of fashion. Her career also expanded into campaigns with global brands, from Versace to Yves Saint Laurent. She became synonymous with elegance and sophistication. Yet her image never felt commercial in the shallow sense. There was always something enigmatic about her, even when selling clothing or cosmetics. Tatiana seemed to be telling a deeper story, one rooted in history, distance, and quiet power. Unlike some of her contemporaries who embraced the celebrity lifestyle, Tatiana remained selective. She was not seen in every magazine or every campaign. Instead, she cultivated an aura of rarity. To work with her was to capture something rare, something refined. That strategy only enhanced her mystique, ensuring that when she appeared, the world paid attention. At the height of her career, Tatiana Sorokko had become more than a model. She was the embodiment of a new chapter in fashion history, the internationalization of beauty, the acceptance of voices and faces once excluded. From the runways of Paris to the pages of New York glossies, she carried with her both elegance and a reminder that even in an industry obsessed with novelty, there was still power in authenticity and difference. Tatiana Sorokko's presence in fashion was not just remarkable because she was the first Russian model to break into the international scene. It was remarkable because she refused to conform to the molds that the industry tried to impose. At a time when Western fashion often reduced Eastern European women to stereotypes exotic, submissive, or interchangeable, Tatiana challenged these labels. She did not play the role of the mystical Russian beauty that editors wanted. Instead, she carried herself with authority, intelligence, and self-possession. She made it clear through her work and her interviews that she was not an ornament, but a collaborator in the creation of images. Her intellectual background also set her apart. Unlike many models whose careers were built solely on appearance, Tatiana was outspoken about literature, art, and history. She brought into the fashion world the aura of someone who had lived within the constraints of the Soviet Union, and who now approached beauty as part of a broader cultural dialogue. Photographers admired this depth. They often remarked that when shooting Tatiana, they were not just capturing a body or a face, but a mind at work behind the eyes. She also resisted the unhealthy extremes of the industry. In the early 1990s, as the heroin chic look began to dominate models with emaciated bodies and blank expressions, Tatiana stood firm in her own identity. Tall, athletic, and unapologetically strong, she was proof that beauty did not need to be diminished to fit trends. Her physical presence was not something she softened, it was something she embraced. There were campaigns she turned down because they sought to stereotype her. Tatiana refused to let her Russian origins be used as a gimmick. She also spoke openly about the prejudice she faced, particularly in the early years when some casting directors dismissed her simply for not fitting the familiar Western ideal. By refusing to hide or apologize for her identity, she forced the industry to expand its vision of beauty. Even in her personal style, Tatiana challenged convention. Off the runway, she dressed with a mixture of simplicity and sharp elegance, often choosing pieces that reflected her own personality rather than chasing trends. She was not interested in being everywhere, in pleasing everyone. She valued selectivity, cultivating her career with intention rather than surrendering to overexposure. What made Tatiana different was not only her beauty, but her defiance of expectation. She was not willing to be shaped by fashion's rigid rules. Instead, she reshaped the rules around her. By bringing intellect, mystery, and quiet strength into a world obsessed with surface, Tatiana Sorokko proved that a model could be more than an image, she could be a statement. Every model who rises to the top eventually faces the same truth. Fashion is mercilessly fleeting, for Tatiana Sorokko. This reality came not through scandal or collapse, but through a quiet withdrawal from the stage she had once commanded. By the late 1990s, the industry was shifting. The age of the supermodel was giving way to a new wave of anonymous faces, chosen less for their presence and more for their interchangeability. Designers wanted malleable blank canvases rather than distinctive muses. For someone like Tatiana, whose allure was rooted in individuality and depth, the change was suffocating. She began to feel the weight of constant reinvention. The pressure to remain visible, to conform to shifting trends, was relentless. Unlike some of her contemporaries who sought celebrity outside fashion through film, music videos, or constant media exposure, Tatiana resisted. She had never wanted to be famous for the sake of fame. For her, modeling was an art form, and when the artistry was stripped away, the profession lost its meaning. Personal life also played its part. Tatiana married Serge Sorokko, a Russian-born American art dealer, and relocated to the United States. Immersed in the world of fine art, she discovered another realm where her passion for aesthetics could thrive. Slowly, fashion's demands felt less like an opportunity and more like a burden. She stepped back, not with noise, but with silence, choosing curation and writing about art over the endless cycle of castings and campaigns. Rumors surfaced, as they always do. Some speculated she had been pushed aside by younger models. Others whispered that she had lost interest after failing to adapt to the grunge-influenced trends of the late 90s. The truth was more complex. Tatiana did not lose her place. She relinquished it. Her retreat was not dramatic, but it was noticeable. Editors who once celebrated her moved on quickly to the next phase. Runways that had once been hers forgot her presence. The industry, in its relentless hunger for novelty, acted as though she had never existed. And yet, for those who remembered, her absence felt heavy. Here was a woman who had not only broken into Western fashion from behind the Iron Curtain, but who had redefined elegance for an entire decade. To see her vanish from the spotlight was both a loss and a reminder of fashion's cruel amnesia. Tatiana Sorokko's disappearance from modeling was not a fall from grace. It was a deliberate step into another life, one where she could pursue beauty on her own terms. But to the public, the silence was jarring. The mystery of her retreat only deepened the aura she had always carried, that of a woman who belonged to the world of fashion, but who was never fully contained by it. Tatiana Sorokko's story did not end when she stepped away from the runway. It simply transformed. From modeling, she transitioned into the art world, curating exhibitions and writing about culture, proving that her elegance was never confined to fashion alone. Her shift from muse to curator mirrored the very essence of her career. She was always more than a face. Her legacy rests into the barriers she broke. She was the first Russian model to command the Western stage, a pioneer who paved the way for countless Eastern European models who would follow. She carried with her not only beauty, but also intellect, mystery, and independence. Today, when fashion celebrates diversity of origin, Tatiana's presence feels like a prophecy. She embodied globalization before the word became fashionable, proving that beauty could cross borders as easily as politics once divided them. Her images remain timeless, haunting in their stillness, magnetic in their depth. They remind us that modeling, at its best, is not about trends but about presence. And perhaps the lingering question is this: if Tatiana Sorokko appeared today, in a world more open to difference, would she be celebrated even more widely? Or was her fleeting brilliance precisely what made her unforgettable? Maybe she was never truly gone. Maybe she simply chose to live beyond the frame,